name is Harold Davis. I'm here to teach you about the art and craft of digital photography.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Harold Davis Studio in Berkeley, California. We are so pleased to have you with us today. My name is Phyllis Davis, and I will be your moderator and co-host today. This webinar is printing, proofing, and all about paper. We are very excited to have three special guests with us today: Moab Masters Scott Barrow and Jim Graham, and Marc Schotland, Vice President of Marketing at Legion Paper. In this webinar, noted photographers and Moab Masters, Scott Barrow, Jim Graham, and Harold Davis will present their work and show how printmaking has informed and played a vital role in their professional practices. The presentations will be followed by a panel discussion of printing with Harold, Jim, Scott, and Marc. I want to thank everyone who is here today, our guest panelists for giving their time and expertise, and you folks out there in the audience. Today's webinar is a benefit for the Equal Justice Initiative. All proceeds from this webinar will be donated to EJI. The Equal Justice Initiative is committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, to challenging racial and economic injustice, and to protecting basic human rights for the most vulnerable people in our American society. As of this morning's tally, we're up to an $800 donation, so thank you so very much. Now a bit about Moab Masters at Legion Paper. Moab Master photographers are a select group of artists connected by their unique visions and their love of reproducing their images on Moab fine art paper. The group includes well-established photographers, as well as photographers on the rise. Moab is proud to be associated with these artists and thank them for trusting Moab with their images. And here's about our wonderful panelists today. So let me start with fine art photographer and Moab Master Scott Barrow. He says that he's an artist who has chosen to work as a photographer. Scott writes, "The dance of light on the world around me is what powers my creativity. I love taking photographs, and I can make a beautiful image anywhere. The challenge for me as an artist is to go beyond beauty and find my connection to a scene, to become part of it in the moment that I release the shutter. That coming together is what I strive for. It's only when I can truly share what I saw and felt with you, the viewer." Scott's website is scottbarrow.com. Editorial commercial fine art photographer and Moab Master Jim Graham was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize while he was at the News Journal and was also named Southern Photographer of the Year at the Southern Short Course. He has worked with AP, UPI, Bloomberg News, Time, Sports Illustrated, Vanity Fair, Newsweeks, and Town & Country. Jim's fine art photography is shown in many galleries throughout the United States. Jim's website is jimgrahamphotography.com. Harold Davis is the developer of a unique technique for photographing flowers for transparency, the creator of multi-raw processing and hand HDR processing. He is a Moab Master and a Zeiss ambassador. Harold is an internationally known photographer and a sought-after workshop leader. His website is digitalfieldguide.com. And last but definitely not least, Marc Schotland is the Vice President of Marketing at Legion Paper, the manufacturer and distributor of Moab paper. Marc has worked in the fine art paper industry for 15 years, having previously worked in Italy for Manfrotto as the global brand manager for still and video tripods. If you visit moabpaper.com, you'll find free Moab classes, a great blog that includes many topics, including papers and printing, ICC profiles for all the Moab papers, and tips on printing from Photoshop and Lightroom, and much more. Now, let me stop my share, and let's see our distinguished panel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Scott Barrow from the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Graham. I'm in Wilmington, Delaware, and let's have some fun.
Hello, everybody. This is Marc Schotland from Moab Paper, all the way from Brooklyn, New York.
Hi, everyone. This is Harold Davis from Berkeley, California, and I am so excited and happy to be with you here today to talk about prints and printmaking. So why don't I take the first slot here? First of all, I want to express some thanks and gratitude, and this is a pretty long list. So in no particular order, thank you, Jim and Scott, very much for agreeing to be here. Thank you, Mark and Moab Paper and Paige, for supporting my career as an artist in such an important and integral way. I wouldn't be where I am and who I am today without you, so thank you. Thank you for agreeing also to participate in this benefit for the Equal Justice Initiative. I feel so strongly that we're on a knife's edge as a country and that we need to do the right thing, and I appreciate your willingness to do this. And this goes for the panelists and for the people who have agreed to be part of this today by contributing. Thank you all very much. My presentation here has really three parts. First of all, I've got a slide presentation, and I'll get to that in a minute. A couple of things I want to show you on my website. One of it, of course, is a message from our sponsor about some future workshops, but I also have some of my print editions, and I want to show you how that works. So without further ado, let me start sharing my screen. So this is prints and printmaking. And I want to point out that we have a new book. It's just reaching people. It's called Creative Garden Photography. At the end of my presentation, I will present a discount link from the publisher. The subtitle of this book is Making Great Photos of Flowers, Gardens, Landscapes, and the Beautiful World Around Us. So it is actually more than garden photography. And here's one of the books before this, Creative Black and White. And I want to point out another book called The Art of Fine Art Digital Printing, which is sponsored, I believe, by Moab, and Phyllis will put up the link where you can get this free book. It's got a lot of information in it. At the end of the show, you'll see the link for downloading the ebook version of this for free. So what I decided to do in my presentation here was go through my records and understand what prints of mine over the years, perhaps over the last decade, have sold best. And these fall into three categories, really. So, and they're kind of different. I mean, just like big businesses sort of segment things, so artists too segment their work. The three segments here are work through conventional gallerists, art galleries, and that kind of thing. Actually, when I think about it, it's four. So that's one segment, work through traditional galleries. Then there's prints I sell directly to individuals, and that's a fairly important category for me. Then there's special projects where corporate designers and consultants come and say, we need a panorama of exactly these dimensions and this proportions, and here's where it's going to go. What can you show the decorator? And then it goes from there. And last and not least, really, are ones where essentially this is a license arrangement that I make with an art publisher, and there are 3 or 4 of these that I work with. One is particularly significant to me, where basically they take my digital files, they make prints, and what they sell are prints. And basically the ones that Phyllis and I care about are the ones we make in our studios, and these are almost entirely made on Moab paper, I might add, and I can talk a little about paper choices. One of the most important parts of printmaking is, in fact, the choice of paper that you make. These are the prints in a black and white portfolio, my first monochromatic visions portfolio with 12 images in it. And the ones you see here are printed on Moab Juniper Beretta. So this has been one of the units of mine that has been popular. Here's a panorama coming out of the printer, more or less, it's about 6 feet wide, I think, and maybe 3 feet high. This was via a gallerist and a interior decorator for a specific location in a very well-to-do person's house. When they came to me, one of the specifications was that the location of the image had to be California. So there you go. This is the Whitney crest from Lone Pine shown here. And of course, as people who hate to waste, one thing we do is when we have a sort of narrow thing on a big 48-inch roll of paper, we snuck in a few prints up at the top, you can see there. Here's a Photoshop kind of composition of dancing nautilus, which I created and has been popular. This is a print, I think also on Juniper Beretta. You can see my signature at the bottom of it, of a Photoshop kind of composition that has been popular. And here's the actual image file itself that the print was made from. One point here is that on Zoom, when I showed the actual image file, you can see it bigger than what I've done is rephotograph the print and put it up. This is a style that I've worked on and I explain in my black and white book after the great nature photographer Carl Blossfeld. These are Queen Anne's lace here with a sepia background. And this has been a popular print. And in fact, a big European art publisher put it up on their website as an actual Carl Blossfeld, which I thought was astoundingly funny in its own way. This is a image, again, it's been a popular print of a what I call a fusion X-ray, because the X-ray itself of the sunflower is combined with a light box image of the sunflower. So it's about 40% photograph and 60% X-ray. And of the various fusion X-rays that I've done, this one has probably been one of the 1 or 2 most popular prints. Here's the actual image file. Phyllis, if there are questions coming in, please feel free to stop me, as it were.
Oh, okay. There's a question from Gary. Can Harold do a webinar on how to create the curled paper effect in Photoshop?
Phyllis, you have a link that you've sent to people who asked about that. I suspect I'm probably not going to do a workshop on that, though.
Yep.
But thank you for the question.
I'll put the link in the chat.
Thanks. Here's another print that is one of my personal favorites. I don't know that the rephotograph of the print comes out that well. This is a fusion of ranunculus and roses, both X-ray and external photograph of the X-ray. And you can see it a little better in the actual file than in the image. And tulips also. So this is a panoramic image of the Kemono-Kodo from a place called the View of 10,000 Peaks on the Kii Peninsula of Japan. It was raining like crazy the day I took this picture. I had an umbrella that I picked up somewhere in Japan, and I trekked up to this place over this sort of almost like an Appalachian trail with gnarly wood and stuff. And I was able to set the umbrella up, get the camera on the tripod under the umbrella and do a panorama in the rain. And it has been it's one of my favorite images for me. And it's also been really successful both as a print in the art market and somewhat surprisingly in the more corporate decor world as well. Here's a shot of some of the images that went into the Kemono-Kodo portfolio, and I'll go into that in a little more detail toward the end of this presentation. And the thing you should note here that is somewhat remarkable is that, and the credit here goes primarily to Phyllis, is that this is a single 16 foot length of Moenkopi Moab Kozo paper. So it was all printed as one piece, and Phyllis figured out the imposition, how to fold it so that it made itself into a portfolio. And Phyllis, do you want to add anything to that about it?
It was actually, I had to trick the printer because the Epson 9900, the max that it will accept for the length of a paper is about 10 feet. and I needed to go to, of course, 16 and a half feet. So I put it in as individual printer files without a cut, and then had it back up the exact amount that I needed between each page when it got folded. So it was pretty exacting, and there was a lot of trial and error going on.
Thanks. And here's some of the inside of what that came out like. From one of the artist proofs of that edition. These prints have done nicely as a trio. They're basically all gardens in Maine. The one on the left is the Abbey Aldrich Rockefeller Garden in Seal Harbor. The two on the right are a idiosyncratic outsider art garden called Schleppinghurst. To my somewhat shock and surprise, iPhone imagery, particularly of Italy, has done nicely for us, and we tend to print that on more more sort of softish paper than the other kinds of imagery. But here are some of the ones that have done well.
Yeah, the texture drag is really wonderful for these prints.
You like the Entrada fine art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is one of the photographs that I've been doing more in this series since the pandemic, which are glass on a light box. This is the bottom of a glass vase, and this one, as it turns out, has done very nicely as a decor print. Not so much in the fine art markets, but more in the decor market. This is one of my best known images, Nautilus, originally photographed on a light box and done very nicely. The rooftops of Paris, since this was photographed from one of the spires of Notre Dame, it could not be taken today, alas. Oh, the world has changed. As Phyllis likes to say, the past is a different country. The Altbruck, the old bridge in Heidelberg across the Neckar River, a tributary of the Rhine. Before this bridge went up, in, I guess, the 17th century, there was no real way across the river. Anyhow, this is this image has sold tremendously well. As has this one, which is under the Yaquina Bay Bridge along the coast of Oregon, an old 1930s bridge. And this one also is a popular image. It's underneath the Berkeley Pier here in California. This pier is now closed for lack of safety. And to get to this particular spot, you have to do it at low tide, and you have to be prepared to share it with crustaceans and rats and various other nasty things. But it was a fun place to spend a while. This mysterious lonely islet is in San Francisco Bay. It's been a very popular print. It sits in one of the boardrooms of one of the biggest international law firms, among other things. It was photographed at midnight with a full moon under that cloud cover, and you can see that it's actually a night image if you look at the running lights of the freighter in the background, which are on. Another image that's been quite popular, actually cutting across a variety of markets, and this is the pier, the old-fashioned wood pier in Cayucas, California, mid-coast California, on a foggy late afternoon at about a 30-second exposure. This is an old abandoned railway bridge along coastal Maine. In one of the years I was teaching at Maine Media Workshops, I stopped and made some photographs of this bridge. If you had a print of it and you had a magnifying glass and you look down at the single pixel level at the perspective horizon lines, you can see a picture of my face coming down the tracks. Harold the train.
Is that in Bath, Harold?
Sorry, in Banff? No.
B-A-T-H.
Bath. Yes, it's the old train bridge in Bath, exactly.
Yes, that they've cut off. You cannot get there anymore.
I bet I could find a way, Jim.
You'd have to climb up a little bit, but yes.
I had to climb. I had to climb indeed.
Yep.
This is but in fact, it's been a very successful print, as has this, which is in the Isuin Gardens in Nara, Japan, the old imperial capital of Japan before Kyoto was the capital. But thank you for asking that. Yeah. And another popular image, we have one of the things that happens with prints that are just slightly not perfect is they might end up on our staircase wall. And so we have one of these from one of the purchasers one of the collectors who bought it. It's a tumbleweed in the side canyons down in Antelope Canyon near Page, Arizona. A popular image, not an easy image to print, dandelions in the morning, up close. I was on my belly in the fog. And this is also a popular image. Tulip happens to be in Monet's gardens in Giverny. So just like one of my images has been mistaken for Karl Blossfeld, if you look up Georgia O'Keeffe red rose on the internet, you're quite likely to find my photograph of a red rose, which has been a very successful and popular image for me. It's a more recent one with one of the curls that one of the participants was asking about. And with this image, Peonies Mon Amour, on the lower right, you'll see a hand stamp, which is not actually part of the image. The stamp is an Incan, a Japanese chop, which says photographer as poet. The thing is that this image itself as a digital file is a simulation of what the print looks like on Undu Washi, spelled UNRYU. If you decide you would like to purchase some from the Moab website, I'd say that it's a grand paper and with a very decorative effect. And each sheet of this paper is different. So it's a very interesting thing to create unique works of art on. Here's another image with a simulation of the same kind of paper. And this is Salutation to the Sun, one of my lightbox panoramas that's worked quite nicely. And Into the Vortex of Nature, this is also one of the more successful lightbox panoramas I've done. Hale Garden. This pair of poppies is a fairly recent image, but it's been quite well regarded. A tulip here, you know, it's hard for me to understand exactly. I love all my children, all my images. And you know, maybe some days some are more favorite than others. I like this image. Why it has proved to be something that when I look through the records has been quite well accepted in the marketplace. I can't quite tell you, but it has, as has this black and white version of a tulip also. And this Magnolia stellata. Here's Phyllis's hands holding a panorama inset on Undu paper from our Botanique artist book. And this composite has been a quite popular image, exhibited a number of places, including one of the theme images back when they had Macworld at one of the Macworlds. So I have a series basically of somewhat surrealist images here that have actually done quite well as in the decorative art world. And this image of a Tuscan morning, a Tuscany landscape, has been quite widely printed. This one is Point Reyes Head. If you look carefully, you can see the landmass of the head of the Point Reyes Peninsula at the back, and people seem to like large, evocative prints of this. So, and similarly here with these very long exposure wave images, to me, what's odd about the way these wave images have worked in the marketplace, particularly this one, is that they've been seen as simply decorative regardless of the subject matter. And there was one installation, I think probably for a hotel or something, where they hung it sideways. Go figure. And this is Point Reyes again. You could say the same Point Reyes head with the lighthouse sticking around the left. On the art editions menu of my website, we have a couple of the art editions that we do. I should explain that generally with my prints made in studio, I sign them personally, but I don't number them typically. But what we do create in editions are artist books. So this is Botanique, and you can learn more about it here. And what we've been doing with these is tracking the numbers. So as the edition sells out, it gets more expensive. So that's what this one looks like. And here's the one with the single piece of 16.5 paper, the Kimono Koto portfolio, and it's quite an interesting thing. You can see some of the images that are in it here, and and again we're tracking the numbers on that piece. And last but not least, here's the first Monochromatic Visions portfolio. I'm at work on a second Monochromatic Visions portfolio, but we haven't got there yet. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just take a minute. And I think, Phyllis, unless there are any real great questions, we should turn this over to the next panelist.
Great.
I guess that would be me, Scott Barrow. Here we go. I've always been a location photographer, except for a brief stint in New York where I was doing studio work. And it turned out I don't do anything inspiring in a studio. So I'm much better out, before dawn, after sunset, and freezing or sweating myself with just running after something to see what I can find. And I started off this selection with a series on New York City. I was lucky enough to spend the 80s in New York City, which was a very interesting place then, a lot grittier than it is now, but I understand that it is getting grittier again. This is a photograph I did where I actually had to go out from Jersey City onto a pier that should have been torn down 40 or 50 years previous to this. So it was basically a situation where it was basically a long board surrounded by water by jumping over to another board, broken nails, etc. So, but the image worked out really well. And it was even more exciting getting back after dark. Sorry about that. Here we go. So this is what every photographer fears when he's out on his own, is that you're shooting somewhere, you've got a tripod, and you don't have a permit. So that's what this is called, permit ? And I always liked this photograph because it was so spontaneous. This was another photographer from France that was shooting a model, and the cop was only interested in the model. This picture was taken when I was, actually a lot of my photographs came from doing advertising assignments in New York. And I was working on a series of photographs for one of the Big 8 accounting firms. And they were doing a marketing program where they were trying to make accountants look vital on location. And this was the old downtown police headquarters, which was being turned into condominiums. And after we'd finished, I went wandering up and I ended up in the clock tower, and I found this guy asleep. So I nudged his boot, and he woke up shocked, and he looked at me like, "Are you not going to tell anybody where I am?" And I said, if you pose for me, I won't tell anybody where you are. And he even signed a model release. So this had that sort of Lewis Hine feeling of it too, where this man is actually called the clock keeper. And I'll go through these pretty quickly. This is up in Harlem actually back probably about 1981 or 82. This was done, there was a gentleman called, he called himself Franco the Great. And he decided that the best way to control the graffiti that was happening in New York, especially in Harlem, was to hire the graffiti artists. And so basically they started painting these grates at night. and all up and down 125th Street in Harlem were these grates which are still there. And it was the only part that wasn't graffiti because they had done the work themselves. When I was choosing pictures for this, I only chose photographs that had actually sold really well from my gallery. I've had galleries in, we moved to Lenox, Massachusetts in 2002, and it was just as Epson had gotten to the point where they could really, their printers were really making prints that could last a long time. And that's when I started my first gallery, and it's always been basically it's been the Scott Show now for 14 years. This I shot and then put up right after September 11th, when everybody was focused on who was at fault. So this sort of seemed like it honed right in on what everybody was questioning or fearing. This has been one of my most popular photographs. It was done on Vesey Street, and it's called New York City 8 a.m. And it's sort of a timeless photograph because you've got everything from this woman on the lower right who's got real 1980s hair going on to the guy that's in the lower middle who's looking at his watch, and that hat makes him look like he could have stepped out of Mad Men. And I had a gentleman buy this photograph, and he said, "This is perfect for my office." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "This is a great example of all sorts of people on a daily basis missing an option to connect to each other." So he saw it as a lost opportunity. Yep, again. This picture I put in because sometimes being in New York in the 80s could be somewhat stressful. And this picture I took the evening after I had been, or day after I had been running around for various appointments and running for a bus. The bus saw me coming, and the guy went ahead and closed the door and took off anyway. So this picture is called "I Kicked a Bus Today." Brooklyn Bridge. This is called "Rising from the F." I love doing aerial photography. And this was shot just before her 100th anniversary. And they had just completed the renovation or restoration. And so basically, but the photograph that I missed after when I was doing this shot was if you went about 20 degrees to the left, what you could see was a woman wearing a powder blue bathrobe, wearing a ranger's hat, shaking her fist at the helicopter. Because evidently she lived out on Liberty Island and was really tired of photographers coming over at sunrise to take photographs. This is Grand Central, and my feeling on this, I don't do composites very often, but I was working on a series on time, and it occurred to me that everybody in New York sort of has their own schedule or their own time zone they're traveling in. So everyone in this photograph has a different watch face over their body. I like this photograph because I can smell it. And this photograph I had forgotten about, and a woman that was looking for a gift for her friend in the theater business found it on my website. So Rockefeller Center. This was a picture I did when I was shooting for Air France, when they were my client, and Brian De Palma was filming Bonfire of the Vanities. So I got hired to take this photograph because the Concorde never landed at sunset when the light was nice. And they hired the Air France Concorde to take off and land empty for the film. And I was the photographer that got to take the photograph that was used in, I think, an American Express trade ad, along with Air France. This starts this group on shadow.
Hey, Scott, we've lost your audio for some reason. If you go to the bottom, there's the audio. I think it's on the lower left.
I've got his mute, stop video participants.
Excellent. You're back.
Okay.
That was a Zoom glitch.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So anyway, this is a group of photographs called Shadow Play. I was in New York, and it turned out it was the day of the Easter parade, Easter. And so I bought some bunny ears, and I spent the rest of the day with them traveling around New York, seeing what I could find. Huh. You know, this whole series, the shadows were the heroes. So this is two shadows checking out another shadow. This was interesting. You know, when I put up a show, if I put up 20 to 25 photographs, I know there's 4 or 5 that everybody will respond to. And I never know which those photographs are. And this happened to be the most popular photograph in that show. This is down in Wynwoods in Miami. This was taken in the Goggenbara forest. I sell a lot of tree photographs. Trees have been very popular, and this was done on a trip I took to Ireland. And this photograph was here in the Berkshires, and I photographed this tree in a storm. There's a heavy storm going on, and then at the last minute, the sun popped out below the clouds, and it sort of lit this thing up. And we ended up selling to a client who bought a 4-foot by 6-foot print of it. And we managed to find a molding to frame it with that looked as if it had been peeled off of this tree at sunset. It's just amazing. This was shot on a trip to Greece. And I was having dinner in a restaurant with my family across the street. And my tripod was a couple of rags that I grabbed off the shoulder of a waiter as he walked by, and I set up my camera on a table outside under an umbrella. It's interesting too because the lightning strike looks as if it's hitting in the spot where they had actually stored munitions in there. These are some travel pictures just from trips that I take on a regular basis. This is Amish country down in South America. Buenos Aires. I had 3 hours to photograph in Buenos Aires on the way back from a trip I'd been shooting for a cruise line. And I got lucky enough to find this area. This is called Bahamas Hands, shot on actually on an assignment when I was in the Bahamas for one of the detergent companies of all things. And I found this, they call them caravans, on a very dusty lot near the beach. And it seemed like such a sad place to be. I took its photograph. And one day in the studio, I started thinking about, I looked at that photograph, I thought, what's life like for this caravan in its fondest memory? So this is called Caravan Dreams. And it's basically the same image, just reworked 9 times until it finally gets this nice little end here where it's, you know, the moon is out and somebody's finally at home and staying in it. This has been a really popular photograph. This is Buenos Aires again. And this picture, interesting enough, has sold well too. And I think it's sold from everything from people to put in their homes to a pharmaceutical company for an antidepressant. So, this is in Paris. And this is Mount St. Michael in Cornwall, England, which is very similar to Mount Saint Michel in Paris, or in France, but on a whole different level. This is taken from the bedroom in the pub I was staying in. Cornwall again. And I spent most of my career doing advertising assignments and annual reports. And this was done when I was shooting for a company that basically, it's a railroad company, and they have a black stallion as their corporate symbol. So I was given 3 layouts to work on, and one was a horse running through the desert, another was a horse running through the surf on the West Coast. And this was taken in Monument Valley. We ended up getting 3 Liberty trained horses. Liberty trained horses are ones that you can let go and they won't run away. And we shot it in Monument Valley. And this was we were there for 3 days photographing 3 different horses. And this was the last roll of Kodachrome 200 on the last day, or in the last hour of the shoot. And that's the one we used for the ad campaign. Aerials over actually the Jersey Shore. I was doing a book on the state of New Jersey back in the late 80s. This was actually the pier that ended up in the ocean after Sandy. And then it's up in the Berkshires. This is an aerial of Tanglewood, the Tanglewood Music Festival, which is where the Boston Symphony spends their summers up here. And we go from a sleepy town to one of having about 800,000 people come through during the summer months, which is why my gallery worked here in the Berkshires. This is the first winter I moved to the Berkshires, and it seemed like it started snowing in October and it didn't stop until April. And I shot this just before dawn up at one of the resorts around here up in Cranwell. And this was the first print that I made, and I took it when I opened up my gallery, and I stuck it on the front door and opened the door because I didn't have a sign yet. And the first day we had about 100 people come in, and most of them came in because of this photograph. They're wondering if it was a painting or not, but it still continues to sell. This picture was taken just after sunrise. You can see the sun coming up right behind the trees. And it was with a wide angle lens, so I made this little stream look much more important than it was. And as I shot the picture, I thought, this is nice, but I don't really care. This photograph needs something else. And I was sort of talking to myself, and then I heard the geese. So I took 5 steps to the right, and the geese flew over, and I got 2 frames, and that's the one that kind of made the photograph. This is that same tree in 4 Seasons. This is the first time actually I'd ever taken a photograph where, as I shot it and I looked at it on the back of the camera, I realized I was thinking about what I was going to do to it once I got back to the gallery. And what I wanted to do is I realized it didn't feel as good as what it felt like to be there. There's a lot of moisture in the air. This is early in the fall. So I put just a little bit of a blur filter on it, just enough to kind of soften up the foreground, and brought the saturation up a bit on the color, and it really popped, and people love it. Another elm tree here in the Berkshires. This is the one day a year when that sunlight comes through this break in the trees. And I've got a lot of these textural water photographs that have done extremely well with interior designers. So. This is a guy who came, when I first moved up, I was out at sunrise on a lake taking photographs, and this guy came in to put his rowing scull in, and I asked him if he'd mind if I took some photographs while he was leaving the dock. He said, no, that would be fine. And then as he was getting ready, he said, would you like to take some pictures of me on the water? So he gave me a dinghy to use, and we went out, and when I was going along pacing him in the dinghy, and I realized I couldn't really shoot sitting down. So I stood up in the dinghy and I kind of surfed it by shifting my weight while we shot this. And this photograph really worked. And he would often come into the gallery to see it. And I finally asked him one day, what is it about this photograph that works so well for you? And he says, I can't believe how perfect my form is. So this photograph is called Stairway to Heaven, because it's got the line of stairs going down into a lake, the surface of the lake, and they're reflecting the clouds up above. And this is a man who didn't go fishing, didn't go speeding around. He just liked sitting in his boat in the lake. One of the nice things too about making prints is that you see things you wouldn't normally notice. And most of us, I think, spent the better part of our beginning career looking at 35mm slides on a light table. And so, and you missed a lot. And now, when you start to make a print and you blow it up to be able to do some spotting or whatever you had, it wasn't until I made the large print that I realized that there was another kayaker just coming around the bend in the distance. And this is a project for, up in the Berkshires, we had, our main business for many years was General Electric. And it was a company town, and General Electric did everything it could to make sure that nobody had any place else to work except for General Electric. And about 15 years ago, they left. And they sort of did a job on the local economy. And this guy was one of the workers that we shot. I did a project called Our Industrial Heritage 2.0, and it's really about what's being made now in the Berkshires. And I spent 3 months going to all these different companies that nobody knew about. And this was sort of a happy accident. I had, there's a company called Unistress that I've gotten to know really well, and I called the president and I told him what a project I was working on. He says, yeah, whatever you want. So he said, call so-and-so. Well, so-and-so called me and he said, what do you want? Perry says, you can have whatever you want. So I said, well, I'd like to do a photograph of all the guys coming in from lunch. And he goes, that's fine. How many do you want? And I said, well, how many do you have? He says, well, we got about 100 guys. Do you want them? So basically they gave me 100 of their employees for 35 minutes to photograph any way I wanted to. And as I was at the long end of this 200, 300 foot long industrial space. And as the guys were starting to come in through the doorway at the far end, I realized that that was the photograph, not where I was set up for. So I went ahead and did the shot. And then later when I opened it up to look at it, I realized that if I zoomed in on just this little piece at the end, that the grain really worked. And interesting enough, in the gallery, I made a 40 by 60 inch print of it. And the only people that paid any attention to it were women. And finally, one day I asked a woman who was standing there looking at it for about 10 minutes, I said, can you tell me why it is that you're attracted to this photograph? And she just smiled and she said, do you think that it's only men who are construction workers that check out women? So evidently they like looking at construction workers as well. This is from Crane Paper, who makes all the paper that our currency was printed on. And this was when you took one of the new bills for Ben Franklin and stuck it under a black light. This is the sort of things you could see that was hidden in there. These are rollers at a printing mill. And these are the buttons that ran and still do, run the printing presses for the Berkshire Eagle, our local paper. And this has been really popular by people that actually it's in a lot of living rooms around town. This is from a company that it's called Lightning Technologies, and they actually make lightning to test aircraft and other things. So they gave me an hour worth of lightning strikes to do whatever I wanted to with. And this is a Hebrew typewriter, which has been probably the most popular image that I have. And it's certainly not an image that took a lot of skill to take, other than maybe just noticing it and doing it. And it sold really well in color and in black and white. And this, another aerial that I did near here. And this photograph was up in the gallery, and a woman came in a couple years after seeing it, because it was right next to the big print I had of the Tanglewood from the air. And she said, you know that picture you had of Tanglewood from the air, I like that. She said, but I really like that photograph of the Tanglewood parking lot. So I said, you mean this photograph? She goes, yeah, that's it. And I said, well, sometimes the Tanglewood parking lot feels like this, but this is actually a junkyard. And she laughed, and then she told me, she says, you got to go to this place that's near where I live. It's all old trucks, and you're going to really enjoy it. So she told me about this place, and it was basically trucks and cars that had been sitting outdoors in what they referred to as the Outdoor Auto Museum. And what happened to the color of the paint was just extraordinary. So, and this, I was over there in good weather, and this was a rainy day. And all the chrome was as shiny as it had ever been, and it had just gotten pitted. So, and a guy came into the gallery one day. I learned a lot from people in the gallery. He said, oh yeah, I worked for General Motors for about 40 years. And he goes, you know, we didn't use the best metal for the hood ornaments. And this picture is one of my favorites. And I had a gentleman was in the gallery one day staring at it for the longest time. And I went over to say hello and talk to him. And he goes, you got to help me out here. He said, my brain, I know that this is a piece of two-dimensional art, but my brain is convinced that this is three-dimensional. And this is the kind of conversations I had all the time because of Moab Entrada bright paper, which I've used 5 or 6 different Moab papers, and this is the one that just I fell in love with. And I'd say probably 90% of what I print is on Moab Entrada bright. And it's gotten responses in the gallery that I never ever got before from any paper I'd ever used. It's just got, there's such a depth to the color that, and oftentimes people actually think it's a three-dimensional object. So. And this is on the same hood, the same car. So there's no expense spared in decoration. So anyway, this whole thing about weathered objects, I've realized is so popular with my clients. And this I found and forgotten about it again when I was starting to go through. I've got actually a library of 350,000 edited slides, which I need to go through. I've had to start somewhere, so I started in the United States. I was in California, and this I took evidently in 1983 at the San Francisco Zoo. And it must have been near the Elephant House. So I took it, and what's kind of wonderful about it, it took me a long time to bring the color back because it was really faded away. And then also what was nice about it is that there's 2 trees in this painting. And it was right next to a real tree, and the real tree had dappled sunlight coming through it and hitting the wall. So it kind of plays with your head. And what I like about it too is that there's a reality check in that it's not a real elephant, which some people have thought, because it's a little box down in the lower left, which was probably for electric or water. So it's been a really popular print. And this one is one of my favorites, and people love this and always smile about it. And it's sold in print sizes from 13 by 19 up to 50 by 90. And I just call it the Palace. This was the Palace Amusement Park in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And it was it actually started originally as a regular amusement park back in the mid 1800s. But it became an indoor one. And this was basically their billboard on the outside of the building. And it was a snapshot. I saw it and I said, oh, that's nice. And I popped it. And what I realized later on, and after having printed it, was that what's cool about it is they realized that their demographic was moms that took their kids to the amusement park. So it's the mothers that are having the fun in the bumper cars. And this is from a trip to Myanmar, which I did about, I guess maybe 2 years ago. And it's got particulate matter, which all of us love. And there's plenty of dust in Myanmar. Fishermen. And this no color, this is just the color it was. I didn't do any manipulation to the color. This was the first day I got there, and I had been traveling for about maybe 2 days and with very little sleep. And then I got in and thought, well, at least I've got a day, I'm early. I've got a day I can relax. Well, it turned out I'd forgotten about the time frame there. So we were leaving in 2 hours. And this was the morning after I got there. We got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the market. And I was having a hard time focusing. And I I realized it was probably from sleep deprivation. So this was taken about 6 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, well, if I can't make a picture, at least I can make a picture of what it feels like to be here. And so this is part of that kinetic energy that was going on. And interesting enough, everybody in this photograph knows where they're going and why they're going there. But everybody's got a purpose in the marketplace. People either love this photograph or hate it. So. I love this one Buddha. It's got a head tilt. And this was making lemonade out of lemons. It was one of the first days we were there. It was cloudy and rainy, and so there was no sunset. And this is the equivalent of rush hour from Yangon for people going home across the water. And so a slow shutter speed and little pumping of the color, and it made everything go. People like this picture.
Jim, I think you're on.
And I'll unmute myself.
That's a good start for sure.
It's a good start. I should tell you a little bit about myself in that I am really a commercial and editorial photographer. I do most of my work for magazines and different entities like that. And I also do some fine art work, and I do some weddings. So I just think of myself as kind of a working stiff. I go out and I have to go work make a living every day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little slideshow of just a variety of what I do, which is you'll find some commercial editorial, some weddings, and then you're going to see some other work that I think more of as fine art. I go into the Arctic, to both the Antarctic and the Arctic, and I for whatever reason, I've decided that I really love Iceland and Greenland, Antarctica, and I just find pictures there for me, and Maine and Nantucket. And so I'll just show you this, and we can go from there. Thank you. I appreciate you all watching, and I hope you enjoyed the work.
Thank you very much, Jim. It was very impressive work. I really enjoyed it myself.
Thank you. I hope that folks will ask questions. What I can tell you a little bit about what I do is printing for me is part of my, I guess you could call it my workflow. Going out and making the images is certainly incredibly important for me, and it's what I truly enjoy the most. But coming back with today digital files as opposed to negatives, I find it's really important to print them, to get them onto paper, because I sort of can see, you know, where I've screwed up from a color standpoint, from an exposure standpoint. And when I am delivering files to a magazine, if I've made a hard copy print, I really do find that I'm giving them a better file, and that in many cases is great. You know, I know that their Harold uses the Juniper, as do I. I really do love that paper a great deal. I think, but I also think that there's use for almost any paper that you can find, because each paper has a different palette. So you can accomplish any number of things with it. I print a lot of my fine artwork on the Moab, the Somerset Museum rag. And, you know, the first thing I'll do, maybe I'm crazy or not, but I'll just do, because I have an Epson 7800 that's dedicated just to the matte paper. My P800 is pretty much just for the coated papers. But, you know, I'll just go ahead and make a strip like that for print. And this tells me whether or not I've screwed it up or not. The beauty of it is that in many cases, I get a first time. You know, I've color corrected my monitor, and bingo. So
I think you're so correct. I think you're so correct, Jim, that you just can't see an image until you've printed it.
It makes a huge difference. And you know, I think about the people that just want to store them on their iPad, and when does the iPad go away? And all of a sudden you don't have anything left. But if you've actually printed your images, you know, you've always got something, and it's tactile, and or if it's on the wall, it's visual, and it's always going to be there. It's just like a book. A book is forever. You know, prints are forever, and they really do. It makes it sort of, you finish it. You started it when you went out the door. You got to wherever it is that you're going to make the picture, and you came home and you made the print, and you finished it. And it's a nice flow that you can sort of move on from.
So you've touched on a little bit on everybody's favorite paper. I know that, Harold, and you touched on that in the beginning part, and Jim, you just spoke about Somerset Museum rag, and Scott talked about Entrada, and I know that you also use Canvas. You have your certain, I guess, your go-to paper. How do you overcome, I guess, that? Because the image dictates the paper, I would assume.
Yes, it does.
And so the other way around, how do you, I guess, overcome your favorite bias? And then do you do a test paper for each image to find out which works, or you know the paper so well and you know the images so well that you already know what it's going to look like?
Well, each paper has its own characteristic, and the Entrada, the bright is going to be good and clean. So then it's a toss-up between, you know, whether or not I want to use the Entrada. And I think my feeling is that the Entrada has a little bit more tooth than a little bit more texture to it than the Somerset Museum rag. The Somerset Museum rag might be a touch bit brighter, but you can correct me on that one, Mark. So then it's sort of, okay, do I want something with a little bit more tooth, a little bit more watercolor feel to it, versus if I want to go to the natural where I've got that warmer feel to it. So it's knowing the characteristics. It's getting the sample pack. Honestly, having a sample pack around, even just to look at the paper to see or to feel it, is really important. You know, I love, actually, I've got a sheet in right now of the Unru, of the Japanese washi, and you know, for the right image, where you can, and especially if you could create a shadow box where you can light through it so that you get the texture in the image, it's awfully nice to be able to do that, and adds an extra layer of depth to what is essentially a two-dimensional image, and you can create the third dimension.
So yes, I mean, sometimes the whole thing speaks, and you say maybe 20% of the time it's very, very clear. There's one paper that's really going to work best, and that's the way to go. But if it is doubtful, then the thing to do is to try it and see and compare it. And I saw a question from the audience about whether, I think Danielle asked, do they render colors differently? And the answer there is that in fact they do. And in fact, the dynamic range and how much pop for colors they are varies paper to paper. And the question of how important that is for a given image does lead to choosing things. There are papers that have comparatively low dynamic range and low color pop, and an image where the saturated color is the important thing would not be a good match for that paper. It might be an otherwise wonderful paper and for some other images, but not if you want to see a spectacular color contrast in some way.
No, that's true. And you know, I know that Harold, you like the slick rock, and that just has such a marvelous pop to it. I mean, you get the incredibly saturated colors and the brightness out of that, and that white base that it has, you know, works especially with the projection that you have behind you, where you've done the light boxes of the flowers, the floral light boxes. It's just the right thing to use, and it really highlights the color as opposed to pushing the color back.
And as Daniel just said, he says one deciding factor for me, image dependent, is the color temperature of the paper base, and that's right. There are essentially, subjectively, there are warmer and cooler papers, and you can measure that with a color photospectrometer and put it into numbers. But yeah, you know, and then are you going to a colorful look? By the way, quickly, in answer to another question, Moab does have a color sample pack. Is that's something that has a nominal cost, right, Mark?
Yeah, that's we have 2 sheets of each paper, so it's for about $25. You get, I think, almost 30 sheets in there, so you can test everything out, and then you find your preferred paper. What we find that even our technical director does is that he uses that to test an image that he wants to do for a specific edition, and he'll print out his image on all the papers just to see how different they look. And that's actually a fun exercise to do, is to take an image and see how great it looks and how poor it looks on a particular paper. And I know Harold's one of his favorite papers is the Unru Moenkopi, and that either works or it doesn't work. There's no in between on that. That's
exactly right. It's either a hero or zero. The images that it work with, I think Jim said that too, are just wonderful. The images that it doesn't suck a big one. They're just wrong. They're not. It's decorative. I'm going to get. I see a question a couple of questions from the audience. One is about whether panelists have recommendations regarding inks or printers, and I'll get to that in a second, and also about not putting prints behind glass, which is another issue. And you know, I'll get to that in a second, but I will say, yeah, having a sample pack and looking through it is really just a great idea, particularly as you're getting started with prints. There are just so many wonderful papers, and one of the wonderful things about living in this time in terms of printing, there's some not so great things about living in this time, but I won't go there. The great thing about living this time in terms of printers is that, wow, you know, the color choices are astounding, and the longevity of the prints and the ink and everything about it. I mean, honestly, printing in the wet darkroom was great, and it was kind of magical, but this is so much better and so much easier in the sense that once you have it, it can take a while to get the print right, the right paper, the right settings, the right file, the right profile, and we can talk about all that stuff, and that can take a while. But once you have it, you have it. And you can, you know, what we do is we archive a master file for a given image, and then for a specific paper from that image, we archive a master file so that we don't have to fight again to get it another time, and we can replicate the previous results. What I also find is that clients sometimes specify the paper. I have to have a discussion with them. How do you want this? You know, it's so very different to have a print on Undo, on Unrayu, than it is on Slick Rock. And sometimes both might work with a given image, and you have to have a discussion. Here are the possibilities. What do you want? In terms of printers and ink, and other people, please feel free to jump in. There are two companies who make high-end gear. They're Canon and Epson. It's one of those situations where there are religious issues fought over this, and I don't tend to get religious. The advantages of one are not the disadvantages of the other. We've come to the conclusion that for our money at the higher end, Epson is slightly more configurable. However, it's harder to maintain. You know, there's this issue of the printer heads, and Canon printer heads can basically be rolled in and out, whereas Epson printer heads, when they go south, require a technician and a lot of money. So that's a big deal. The Canons are easier to maintain. However, we believe that we can get a little more juice out of the Epsons at the really highest end. So you take your money and you pays your chances on that. There's no choice about the inks. You use the manufacturer's inks. Otherwise, you void your warranty and are being penny wise and pound foolish. That part of it's easy. What was the other question? Oh yeah, framing things without a protection of either plexiglass or glass. Personally speaking, I don't do that unless I'm printing on metal, which is kind of beyond the scope of this webinar, I think. I can see printing on canvas or metal, and I have printed on canvas without protection, except perhaps that wonderful Moab spray protection, which is a nice thing.
Well, the desert varnish does give you a modicum of protection, but you know, leaving the print out in the air, you know, you can get scuffs, and you really are better off if you can just put it under some plexi or put it under some glass. You know, maybe give it a little bit of space. You know, if you've got the right mat board, something like Rising or something along those lines, give it an 8-ply mat board, and you've got the distance between the glass and the print, you're better off.
I think it's exactly right. I mean, I tell people, frame this, use museum or archival framing. The inks and paper are rated for at least 200 years. You know, for love or for money, or for $100,000, you couldn't buy a print that Weston printed during his lifetime at this point. I like to flatter myself that I and all the other Moab Masters will be in a similar situation 40 years from now. So why wouldn't you want to protect it?
Well, and I've always said to some clients, as you know, look, if the thing goes south in 200 years, come find me, I'll make another one for you.
It's important to think about framing as well, that it's the final piece in the final presentation. Photographers, all photographers I know spend countless hours selecting the paper, countless hours and time selecting the right printer before they buy the printer, and it's taking their work to the next step, is that spend some time on proper framing to protect your prints, especially if you're selling them. And Scott, I know you have all that work behind you. I've been up to your gallery, and you sell framed and unframed, but your presentation, you know, the value of your framed print, I think, is far higher than just the unframed print that you're selling too.
Well, you know, with I can speak to both of these things intimately. One is that I've been printing off of, I started off with an Epson 9600, which lasted for the first 4 or 5 years of my printing. Worked beautifully, but you were constantly worried about heads clogging. And recently I've been printing with a 9890 for the last 3 years or so, and I loved it. But I let it go a little too long without making prints, and eventually the heads went. And so and it turns out that once you lose a color, you're in trouble with that. And it was going to cost me about $2,500 to get my heads changed. So, but rather than turning it into a doorstop, I realized it still makes beautiful black and white prints. So my Epson 9890 has been sort of turned into my black and white printer of choice. And that's worked beautifully. And as far as how to display the photographs in the gallery for years, I found that if I had a black frame on something, people would say, I love this photograph. Do you have any white frames? And I was doing, 4 or 5 shows every year. And so a friend of mine introduced me to a thing called Poster Hanger. And it's a wonderfully simple device, which basically is a rod that fits on the top and the bottom of your print. And provided you have exactly the right size rod for the right size paper, it's got one hole in the back and it can't help but hang straight. So every show I've done for the last 5, 6 years has been put up with poster hangers, and people get to see exactly what they're getting. And that's why the Intrada Bright, that's one that people really appreciate the quality of it because they can see it. And the only tricky part is that you do have to kind of keep people from touching it in the gallery. But when I suggest to people, they say, can we just hang them like this? And I said, well, I think no matter what, you really need to print it. You need to have it framed properly if it's going to be able to be protected, because it's easy to, scratch them or whatever if they're moved around too much. But it's from a display standpoint, especially for us photographers, if we've got the opportunity, it's a great way to show your work and I can get a print up on the wall in about 3 minutes. And then when the show's over, what hasn't sold, it very quickly goes back into a box. So the next show can go up. So that's just the aside of how it turned out. It's worked really fine in the gallery. And some people, like a lot of my people that come, are traveling. So they love to take something home in a tube or have it shipped flat to them so they don't have to worry about it until they get home. And oftentimes we ship things directly to their framers. So that's worked out well.
Are you using the print that you hang in the poster as an example and then have another print that they take home with them? Or are you selling them the print that you have in the poster hanger?
It depends. And what I did realize was when using the poster hanger, because it covers up about 1/2 inch of the top and the bottom of the photograph, I found that when I took the poster hangers off, that what you hadn't noticed, because it had been up for a couple of months actually, was that the paper underneath the poster hanger was brighter white. And there's no direct sunlight coming into the gallery. I think it's just atmosphere. So Mark turned me on to the desert varnish, and I've started spraying everything with that. And when you take the poster hangers off, it's all the same white. So it really works. So that took care of that problem. And so sometimes they go from that spot into another hanging sleeve that we've got. And as long as the photograph hasn't been damaged, we'll sell those as the original prints. So.
Yeah, I always get oh, I really love the print and I'm glad it's matted, but boy, I like the frame. It's nice, but I might want another frame. And my feeling is I've always sort of felt as though, once you've gotten it into the frame, that's its home. And it's kind of that particular one's kind of got to stay there. So it's difficult, sort of bargaining back and forth over whether or not they want to buy the frame with the print or not.
Well, I can tell you that right behind me, I think there's 3 or 4 frame prints here. Those are the only frames that I own.
Huh.
I made a commitment to not be one of those photographers that I had a basement full of frames. And it's worked out really well. And we frame for clients as they need them. So.
Just in time inventory. Good man. Yeah, we don't do framing basically. I mean, it's just one bridge too far. Phyllis and I have a fair amount of skills between us and 4 kids, and we will help advise people on framing. When I sell directly to a collector, my preference would be to ship it to a framer, not to the customer, unless they know what they're doing. But we're just not going to frame as part of a project.
There's a question from Corey. Do you coat all your prints, including the ones delivered to a paying client?
I mean, the short answer here would be no.
I would say it depends. And I'm sure that Moab wouldn't be selling a product that was going to be a problem down the road. So I have prints that have been for many years that we delivered without spraying them, and now we do. So it's, I think from what I can tell, it actually does add some protection to the prints. So
I see a email or on the chat from Lester Picker, who is an expert in these things, and he says they're doing a case study on Moab Desert Spray versus other sprays and tips on how to use it too. So that's something that people will be able to find, I guess, on the Moab website, right, Mark?
Yeah, it's part of the fine art print ebook that Les Picker wrote. And if you go to the fineartprintebook.com that Phyllis put up there to download your free ebook, there's a website that Les puts up 2 case studies a month on printing and profiling, and he's doing one on the desert varnish, which is just it's a UV inhibitor. So it protects your prints, and as Scott said, if there's indirect or atmospheric pollution, it protects against that. A lot of photographers like Harold, I guess, prefer not to put any coating on there when they send their print out, because if it ends up behind a frame, you really don't need a UV inhibitor because the glass will do that work for it. So it's the raw print that's selling.
Provided you specify museum or low UV museum or conservation glass, which we always do.
But Mark, the desert varnish though is more for your cotton papers, the Entrada, the Somerset Museum rag, that sort of thing, versus the juniper.
Correct. Yeah, it can be used both for the wood-based papers and also the cotton papers, but it's designed for matte papers, not for the glossy or semi-gloss.
I'm going to pick a question I see coming in from Setup. Do you sharpen images before you print? If you do, is it a function of the type of paper you use? To talk about this a little generally, there are 3 kinds of sharpening. There's input sharpening, there's output sharpening, and there's sharpening during the post-production process for visual emphasis. And these 3 kinds of sharpening have different purposes and different, raison d'etres. Input sharpening is something that happens as part of the conversion of a raw file, either via Lightroom or Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw, or whatever conversion program you use. By default, if you haven't unchecked the boxes, you are doing a little input sharpening. And this is going to depend on cameras, optics, lenses, things like that. But generally speaking, a little bit of input sharpening happens. Output sharpening is something that basically you do to the specification of the printer, if it's an offset process like a book or a magazine, via the settings in the pre-flighting and all that part of the thing. Or you do, if there's a reason for it for the paper. Generally with a fine art printing paper like Moab's papers, you probably are not going to be doing much output sharpening. The third kind of sharpening during the post-production process for visual emphasis, that is something that we will sometimes do carefully at the end of our post-production process just before printing the image. And probably a subject of a webinar that we may do someday would be about sharpening.
I'd like to see that, please.
Yeah. It's funny. I don't, obviously, I typically use either Camera Raw or Capture One. And I don't find that I do a ton of sharpening on the backside. When I send it to print, it's already sharpened from what I've done as I'm working on the image itself, as opposed to doing an output sharpening. So it kind of is what it is when it goes to the printer after I've been done editing it. Is that, Scott, is that where you are too?
Yeah, it's back to this thing of when your monitor's calibrated, I find that I hit the mark within 10% almost every time I pull a print. And that 10%, I can't say if it's good or bad. It's just not quite exactly what I want, so I can play with it. But as far as the sharpening goes, it seems like basically it's unsharp mask free for me. And a lot of the times it really just comes up based on, how sharp the image was when I took it. Was it on a tripod, or was it on a high shutter speed, or from bouncing around in an airplane or whatever. So it just depends. I'd love to not have to sharpen it, but because there's always the artifacts you have to worry about.
Yep.
And that's why, Harold, I'd love a seminar about sharpening. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think I could help you with that, Scott, actually.
How often are you guys calibrating your equipment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I was just about to address a related question, which is that one of the people in the audience asked, I think, how important is it to look at prints under a calibrated light source? We used to be a little more compulsive about it, truthfully, than we are now. Ideally, if you were running a high-end production printing facility, you would want everything to be calibrated so you could soft-proof accurately, so you'd have calibrated printers, calibrated monitors, and calibrated print viewing areas. And you certainly want somebody who's printing something like a book to be viewing what it looks like under a calibrated light source. It's important to calibrate monitors because they can radically get bad, and then you may be looking at it and not doing so much. A calibrated light source for viewing prints is not, in my opinion, that important because real people in real life do not view the prints that they have bought from you under a calibrated light source. So what we find ourselves often doing when we're viewing prints is we pull it off the printer and take it over to a nice sunlight coming in a window somewhere and see what it looks like under that window. That's a partial answer to the question. I'd be interested to know what Mark has to say about it also, as well as Scott and Jim.
Yeah, guys, I hear that I can give my opinion after Scott and Jim, because I'm intrigued and interested in your workflow.
For me, it's window light is the number one thing. But oftentimes I'm printing late into the night, or if I've got a big show coming up, I'm getting up at 3 in the morning and making a few prints and running them and then going back to bed. So basically having color temperature lights in the studio that come as close to daylight as possible, I know that I'm just about there when I take a look at it. And because I know that for most of the time, what's coming off of the printer is very close to what I've got on the monitor, then I'm more looking at the density of the image as opposed to making sure that the color is exact, because I know I have the option of rechecking it again in the morning if I need to. But once I make those test prints, and Harold, what I do, if I have a big show coming up, it's got maybe 30 prints in it, I'll make 4x6 inch prints or 4x6 inch images and gang them up on a 40x60 sheet or whatever, and print them all at one time. And then I can look at them all and I can make my notes on how I want to change any one of those prints to make them either lighter, darker, less red, whatever the combination might be. So that takes care of it, keeps from wasting a lot of paper, and gives me a visual just based on what I'm going to see with my eye and how close it is to what I'm getting off the monitor. So that's helpful.
Yep, I'm in the same place. I mean, I'm doing the same thing. So much as, I've got a BenQ monitor and I use an X-Rite product to calibrate it. I'm probably calibrating it once a month, sometimes once every 2 weeks, but any more than that, no. And, I should do more profiling on my paper versus, from the monitor, blah, 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 blah. But I trust Evan to make sure that the profiles that I get from Moab are the right profiles. So, they're good. It hasn't failed me. I've got an Epson 7800 that really doesn't owe me any money at this point. It's an older printer, but it works. I'm not going to say it hasn't done some things because I don't want it to happen, but it's a great workhorse, and it's that and the P800. I think part of it is I haven't changed inks in it. So the Epson 7800 has always been a matte printer, always, and so that usually has either the Entrada, and so I know that what's going to come out of that is going to be what comes out of it, and I know it's going to work.
Yeah. And Jim, you referred to Evan Parker. He's our technical specialist at Moab. He creates all the profiles that we have on our website for people to download. And I would say probably 99.99% of the questions that come into us are related to ICC profiles. It's, you know, there's another webinar that can be done, should be all done about ICC profiles. And we have, since this pandemic forced us to be creative and forced us to do events such as this, it's allowed us to put Evan out there for open Q&As. So we've started to do that once a month. We're going to be increasing that to twice a month. So it's an open Q&A for anything that has to do with printing, calibration, print out of Lightroom, out of Photoshop. And that's all from our Moab website where we do the webinars. And you can just go to moabpaper.com / Moab-TV, and we can send that out afterwards. But the importance of calibration, and Evan would have more to say about this as he does, because he works in a critical clean room with lighting and the hoods for his monitor, and everything's calibrated once a day because he's creating these profiles for you to download. And we pride ourselves on the quality of our downloads, even of the profiles, even though these are called generic profiles, meaning that it's a one-size-fit-all. The best approach is really to create your own profiles in your own workspace, in your own work environment, because it will differ. And so we do promote that. And also we promote that even in Lester Picker's book about how to profile and how to create your own custom work. But we, as Jim said, we do pride ourselves on the profiles that you can use, that you can download from the Moab website.
And everybody's camera, for that matter, in the digital world, everybody's camera is really going to be a little bit different. You can always hope that once you've profiled your monitor, that your Nikon is going to have the same color once it's profiled as your Canon, as your Hasselblad, as your Phase 1, as your this. But frankly, every file is going to have a different color depth and sort of lean in one area to another. So, you know, getting your monitor profiled in a way that you can see color for yourself is really crucial, I think.
I just want to throw in that Moab does a good job with their profiles. They're easy to find, they're complete in terms of printers, and they're accurate. I love them even before I became a Moab master.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. We work hard. We just put the new P700 up there. We're a little late to the game on that one, but I know that there's a lot of customers who have just bought the new Epson P700 and 900, and we just have those profiles published the other day.
And if anyone has problems understanding how to use these profiles, it's not hard once you get the hang of it, but I'm sure that there's a technical support mechanism that Moab has to help people understand how to load them in.
Yeah, it's also in that free ebook. There's a whole chapter section on that, which is, again, just go to the Fine Art Print ebook and .com and more information than you ever wanted. So just the one thing that I had a question about, it's not really about printing per se. I know we're getting on a technical angle here, but just on, you know, the selling of the prints. You're printing for, you know, people to collect, your collectors, your clients. Some question always gets asked to us, and we have, you know, our own opinions, but when you sign a print, are you signing it with a particular, are you signing in pencil or using a particular type of pen? People often ask us that, and I'm curious to see what you have to say.
Well, let me jump into that. What I'm going to, my preference will be to sign a print on the front of the print below to the lower right in the conventional place. If it's a photographic kind of paper or a shiny paper like Slick Rock, I use a acid-free stylus that specifically the Pigma pens. If it's a paper like one of the washies or a rag paper, more typically I use a pencil, a very sharp pencil to sign on the front. I will note that some art dealers, art consultants, and corporate collections prefer that prints not be signed on the front. That's something that has to be negotiated as part of the sale. And in that case, typically what I will do is I will sign two studio labels. One goes inside on the back of the mat board inside the frame, the other goes on the back of the frame. That's not my preference, and I think it is short-sighted of the collectors who are doing this, because in some ways, when you have your name associated with the print on the paper, it will stay there. I'll also say one other thing about this, and that is that when I was a young photographer in my first photography career when I was in my 20s, that means about 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to spend a bit of time with Ansel Adams. And so when he went through my prints the first time in his house in Carmel Highlands, the one question he asked me, he said, "Harold, where do you sign your prints?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Sometimes on the mat board." He said, "Harold, no, always sign them on the prints, right on the prints. That way people know who made it." So that's my 2 cents.
So there's the pen I used to sign the to sign the photo emulaic papers, the coated papers. And then I just use it's a fine art, it's a softer pencil, but it's a graphite pencil. And on the lower, typically lower right side, and I tend to number my prints. I have 3 size editions of 25 each. So when I'm selling to a gallery, that kind of thing. There are certainly images that, I don't number, I don't sign. And I sell those for significantly less money. But they're like the images that I showed today, those are all what I think of as sort of more signature images, and the signature goes on them, and I have to bill for that. So
I was shocked to see that some of the prints that I had signed with permanent ink markers were fading. And this is stuff from like 2004, 2005. It turns out that a permanent marker may be permanent if it's in a dark box, but they're not necessarily light fast. So I did a bunch of research trying to find a pen that I could use that I could actually count on staying the color it was, for many, many years, if not forever. And I came up with this actually, which is, they're called a jelly roll of all things. And I didn't really even trust it so what I did, because I'm one of the least techie people that I know, this sample, which is actually on the back of a poster hanger postcard, I wrote on this, it says light fastness test of jelly roll. And I put this in the window, south-facing window of the gallery for 2 years, and now it's been in my home. But you can see that it's been hit with direct sunlight every day, whenever the sun's out, for about 1.5 years, a little more than that now. And it still looks great, even though the paper's yellowed at this point. So, and then of course, the other thing, this reminds me of a story that back during the space race that NASA spent over $1 million developing a pen that could write in space. And the Russians solved the problem with a 2-cent pencil. So there, I think, is also a lot to be said for signing in pencil. And so for the paper-based ones that like on the Entrada, I often am signing just in pencil, if not with the jelly roll. But I like signing on the front of the prints, and nobody's ever complained. So.
Nope, never had a problem with that. In fact, for me at least, they've always wanted to see it on the front as opposed to ex versa. That seems to be all the galleries want to see it out front, and because it gives them a branding kind of a tool. So I have signed it on. I have early on. I signed things on the mats, but because at that point I wasn't using a little. What do I use? It's like a 1/4 inch gutter. So I've got my print, and then the edge of the actual image, and then an 8-ply rising mat board that's a 1/4 inch away from the actual image area. So I've got a white space or a gutter around the print, and I'll sign it within that.
Phyllis, how much time do we have? Do we have time for more questions?
Oh, we do have some time. It's up to you folks. We've been going for about 2 hours now, which is pretty amazing.
Well,
So,
Phyllis, I think we should, do 2 or 3 more questions. Phyllis, Mark, I think we should do 2 or 3 more questions and probably call this one a wrap.
right. And everyone has hung in here with us. Our attendees are just, they're all right here.
Except for that one grumpy person.
Oh, the one grumpy person. I already gave him a refund. All done. We had we had a question just a second about it. How important is humidity?
Well, if it's framed properly and sealed, it shouldn't much matter to the print, if that's the question. In terms of print making, a low humidity environment is a good thing.
Yeah, from my perspective, printing some of Harold's prints, when we work on them, if it's a really humid day, we won't do it because everything just doesn't work through the printer. The printer like objects. So we give it a hug, turn it off, and go for another day.
Corey wants to know, is Moab coming out with any other canvas options?
I certainly store all my stuff with those little silicone gel things, and that certainly helps keep them flat. And sometimes some of the coated papers, you'll find that you'll get a ripple or bend if you're not careful about your humidity storage.
Yeah, just on that point, and we can go into Corey's question. Treat humidity and ultraviolet light, anything like that, as you would any piece of work, anything that you own that's priceless or that has a value to it. Any excessive temperature or humidity or UV light's going to diminish the longevity of that image and break it down. So you just have to be careful about how you present in the environment that you present it in. That's just what I would leave everybody with. You don't want to keep your prints in a car in the middle of summer with closed windows, because that will pretty much ruin your prints, just as you keep it in very cold climates as well.
And then I might call protective services on you too.
Yeah, right. Leave a little crack in the window. As for canvas is an interesting area because it's almost commoditized to the point that there's so many canvas products out there, and there's very little differentiating factor between them. You'll have some lusters and some gloss canvas and matte. In the Moab range, we have the Anasazi, which is a matte, fairly bright white canvas. What we found that if you're looking for a luster or a gloss, there's also after print varnishes that you can use. If you're printing on a matte, you can use the gloss varnish to not only protect and seal it, but it also gives you that glossy look to it. So really, given how many different types of canvases out there and they all kind of sell in the same range, there's really not room to add a new one into the Moab range, in our opinion.
You do a lot as it is, Mark.
Yeah, at a certain point, we have a lot of papers. We're trying to, Baryta is an area that's all companies have focused on in recent 5-6 years or so. And so it's Juniper is our Baryta. And so we're working on doing a bright white version of that. That'll probably be our next white paper, new paper that comes out.
I'll look forward to that very much.
Yeah, it's funny because with Entrada, we have a natural and a bright. Naturals used to sell much more here. Much more in Europe than it did in the United States. The United States was primarily bright that outsold natural. And then we've seen that switch over to Europe now, where a lot of people are now buying the bright because they're not really the bright has optical brightener agents that we pump into it. And there was a lot of debate about the longevity of a print and how that breaks down over time. And that was sensitive to the European market, but we've seen a little bit desensitized to that, where now it's just the immediate bright impact. Humans are naturally attracted to brighter objects, and we find that the brighter is now selling much more than natural.
Is Bravura and Portriga still licensed in terms of the name?
Yeah, right. I'm sure they are. Kodak's got to have some asset to sell.
Well, who knows? I want to say thank you very much to everyone. I'll be posting a blog story about the contribution in the next few days. So it's very exciting. And thank you, Scott, very much. Thank you, Jim, very much. Thank you, Phyllis, very, very much. Thank you, Mark. I've really enjoyed doing this, and I hope people have found it valuable.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Be creative and stay mighty.